Happy Tuesday, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. And we're presented today by Deemer Box. And we are fully loaded, getting ready for the cocktail party on Saturday. Can't wait to be there with all of you. I said on the show yesterday, I'm actually watching this game from the stands, ticket in hand, videoed, no doubt, maybe embarrassing myself a little bit. We're going to have a great time in Jacksonville on Saturday. DawgNation Invasion Tailgate, which we'll talk about some more on today's program, and I hope to get a chance to hang out with a bunch of you, whether it be, kind of a, do we do a DawgNation libation on Friday in Jacksonville? Connor Riley says no. See, I hope y'all understand that there's one person around here who's always looking to have a good time and be engaging and interactive, and some of the Grinches that work with me aren't always necessarily in the mood for stuff like that. But nonetheless, I personally hope to be able to see all of you for DawgNation Invasion just in and around Jacksonville throughout the weekend and during the game. I'll try to put out there what section I'm going to be in. Y'all can come on by and see me. We're going to have a really good time for all that. On today's show, too, Jeff Sintel coming up. It is a Marlowe's Tavern insider update with him. A lot of recruiting stuff to get to with Jeff, too. We'll kind of cover all of those bases. Some rumor out there, some innuendo out there, online chatter, as I like to say. Also, some good news for Georgia, at least in one regard. We'll kind of do all that with Jeff. And a bunch on Georgia, Florida. In fact, why don't we go ahead and get it started? It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Deemer Box, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Deemer Box. Go to deemerbox.com/DawgNation for $50 off while supplies last.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Two of my favorite things collided last night on social media for maybe the most on-brand experience for me possible. It was 90s wrestling and good news for the Georgia Bulldogs, kind of all tied up into one thing. I tweeted about this. You probably also seen this yourself. I know there was some activity on Instagram from Lawrence Cager as well. But Cager put out the classic gif of The Undertaker kind of rising up out of the casket. In fact, on video, we'll show this to you. Rising up out of the casket, ready to go. Obviously, a symbol there from Lawrence Cager that he believes he's back at full health and he's ready to play against the Florida Gators on Saturday. Somebody responded to me on Twitter, and I thought this was so funny. Now, you have to get the wrestling thing to kind of understand this, but current Knoxville Mayor Glenn Jacobs played the role of The Undertaker's brother, Kane, back in that same era of the WWE, and obviously Kane and The Undertaker were always feuding, and so when Cager gives the Undertaker gif of rising up, somebody else sent this to me of Kane kind of shaking his head no, as if he was the Florida Gators secondary here, the Florida defense. It's all really funny. It's all in good fun, and it's also potentially good news, I guess, as we get ready for Georgia, Florida on Saturday. We know how important Lawrence Cager is to this Georgia wide receiver core attack. We'll get to that more in a moment. And the idea that Cager himself right now feels like he's going to be healthy and ready to play, I tell you, hard not to view that as a very good thing, especially coupled with not quite as dramatic as The Undertaker rising from the dead, but Kirby Smart, when he met with reporters yesterday, also struck a hopeful tone when talking about Cager and his health status. Here is Kirby Smart from yesterday.
Cager's expected to be able to practice today. To what extent? He was able to run routes and do some stuff Thursday, and thought he looked good doing that. So we're expecting to hopefully get him back, but I won't know more until we see practice today.
Well, let's go get it then. If that's exactly what Kirby Smart is saying ahead of that practice on Monday, as I said before, that's kind of a hopeful tone paired with what Cager himself has said. You feel pretty good about that. Now, deep down, would Smart like to keep this a little bit more of a secret from the Florida stuff? The Florida staff, I guess maybe so. It seems like these coaches protect injury secrets pretty closely here, but I don't think any harm is done by Cager letting the cat out of the bag that he expects to play on Saturday. And we know how important this is. We know what Cager's value is to the Georgia offense. He has been the one receiver this year. And seemingly for Fromm, it's kind of always a guy. It was probably J.J. Holloman last year. It was certainly Javon Wims in the second half of the 2017 season. There's always this guy that Fromm just sort of has a better relationship with than with others, who always seems to have a deeper connection with. And thus far for the Georgia offense, it has been Lawrence Cager. In Cager's absence, has made things probably a little bit more difficult for Fromm. And Kirby, in a roundabout way, kind of talked about that a little bit yesterday as well, that, the receiver position is a chemistry position. And I really believe that chemistry matters in sports. Watch the NBA. Teams have a tendency to play better as the season goes along. They just get used to playing with each other. Certain pitchers in baseball like throwing to certain catchers. Chemistry is a thing that matters. You can't necessarily see it. It's like the wind. You can't necessarily see it. You can't necessarily identify it, but when it's present. And chemistry in sports is just one of those things that when it is present, good things seem to happen. And for Fromm and Cager, there is a chemistry that exists there. And the idea, of kind of all that with the wide receiver core is certainly something that Georgia continues to work on. And Smart yesterday kind of also touched on that topic. Here's more from the UGA coach.
Jake's relationship is probably better with these guys. He spent more time with them, if you think about it. It's not about the relationship as much as it is, ability to win one-on-one, win in space. We call them 50-50 balls or, back shoulders, whatever it may be. We've got to win more battles when it comes to that because people in our league are going to play you a certain type of way, so you got to be able to win those. I don't think it's relationship-driven or rep-driven. I would say continuity of the same guys in the game has kind of been all over the place because every receiver has missed some game in some way, shape, or form. But we continue to work on those. We're going to keep working on them today.
So Kirby Smart says you got to have everybody kind of winning those one-on-one battles because of the coverage that you get in the SEC from very good defensive backs who want to pressure there at the line of scrimmage. There is no denying, though, that the receiver who's done it the best thus far for Georgia, not the only receiver who's made plays, but the guy that's done that the best up to this point in time has certainly been Cager, who you may get back healthy for the game against Florida. Here's more from Kirby on the topic of number 15.
I think, again, at wideout, it's tough because at wideout there's not been a core group that's just been there every game and been able to do it. Cager's the one guy you can make a case has made some plays when he's been available and made some plays on 50-50 balls. We've got to be able to do that because of the way people play us. We're going to have to continue to do that.
So let me be very clear about my point of view on this. As a fan, I think you ought to be over the moon excited about the fact that Cager may be coming back for this Florida game and may be doing so at full health. However, I don't believe that Cager is the only receiver who's likely to, capable of, making plays against the Gators. Much the same way that I said a moment ago that chemistry is a real thing and it exists, and Smart and Cager seem to have that chemistry together. I also think there's something in football and sports in general where certain things just seem to be contagious. I think that Cager's presence on the field on Saturday has a way of benefiting all the Georgia wide receivers because once one guy starts making plays, and Cager has shown you this year that he will, I think it increases the likelihood that George Pickens makes some plays and Demetrius Robertson makes the plays, and hopefully a guy like Dominic Blaylock gets his opportunity to make some plays. I think once good things start happening, those things seem to create a bit of a momentum of their own. And conversely, the opposite, unfortunately, can be true there as well. So Cager returning on Saturday for Georgia, I think, is a good thing. But not because he's the only playmaking receiver for Georgia, but he may be the playmaking receiver that kind of blows the lid off the productivity for this entire group. So exciting stuff there. Let me shift gears and talk about something else here for a moment. And this is one of those moments where honesty compels me to admit that something I wish was true might not actually be true. Even though the lie here is potentially useful for Georgia, the actual truth we probably have an obligation to at least admit. Something else you may have seen on social media last night was Florida defensive back Sean Davis talking a bit about Georgia running back DeAndre Swift. And the way this thing gets spun is another Gator talking trash about Georgia, much the same way that C.C. Jefferson has, or like Chauncey Gardner once did. And this kind of gets put in that category, at least initially. But there is at least a chance this is fake news. And I guess we have an obligation to at least point that out, even though the lie is maybe more fun than the truth. Let me show you this on video. I'll read it to you. This comes from one of those, fly-by-night college football accounts. Here's the quote on Sean Davis of Swift. Normal running back to me. He's quick. You just have to play him like, and then it's ... He's no average running back, but you know what I'm saying. So some people kind of take this as a shot at Davis on Swift that he's an average running back? Or the honest truth is I can't even decipher that sentence whatsoever, but this got spun like crazy and kind of spun out of control. The original tweet from the original reporter, who I guess kind of wrote this, doesn't necessarily clear things up too much. Let me show you that there as well. The same quote. Once again, the normal running back to me, quick, you just have to play him like. And then it seems like the original reporter saying that the Sean Davis said that he's no average running back, but you know what I'm saying. The honest truth is I actually don't know what you're saying. Is this shade? Is this a compliment? I'm not quite sure, but the social media engine kind of got behind this, and suddenly this is being spun as another Florida Gator player talking trash about UGA. Now, the useful part of all of this is, someone else sent this to me on Twitter, apparently DeAndre Swift got word of this because another one of those accounts kind of put this same quote out, and you'll see right here, it looks like DeAndre Swift actually likes the comment. In other words, saying, I'm seeing this, I'm going to read in between the lines here, I'm potentially motivated by all of this. So I guess if it works to get DeAndre Swift worked up for the game, not that he needs to be worked up any more than he is, but I guess if it works in that regard, all is well that ends well. But I'm not quite so sure this is actually any kind of shade. I don't even know what the quote or what the comment even means. It's a little bit hard for me to decipher, but Twitter was all worked up about this last night, and I guess if it furthers the Georgia-Florida rivalry, it's all in good fun. But in this particular case, for once, maybe a Florida player is not exactly accused of what his mouth was alleged to have done, but no doubt somebody's going to say something at some point in time, and the bad blood, the good-natured part of this rivalry, my guess is we'll throw a couple logs on that fire before the week is done here. We're actually going to get more from DeAndre Swift coming up in just a moment. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by DeemerBox. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us. No matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. And as I said before, we're brought to you today by DeemerBox, and I was talking about the DeemerBox a little earlier today. We had some folks come by to tour the studio, and I was talking about how this thing really has so many applications. You know, it's obviously an outdoor apparatus, and it's perfect for tailgating. A lot of you say, why do I need a waterproof box for my tailgate? Well, go to that Georgia-Kentucky game. Phones getting ruined because of how much it was raining. Wallets getting drenched because of how much it was raining. If you have the waterproof, indestructible carrying case that is the DeemerBox, then you would have been able to protect everything that you had there. Also, if you're going hunting this time of year, this is great to have outdoors, going on, fishing, you're going in the lake or the river, let this thing float down the water with you. Bluetooth speaker, works from 100 feet away, 40 hours worth of battery life. The DeemerBox is really just the ultimate thing to take with you outside, and let me invite you to go to DeemerBox.com and take advantage of this great offer. DeemerBox.com/DawgNation, and then use the promo code DawgNation. One more time, DeemerBox.com/DawgNation. Use the promo code DawgNation, and while supplies last, you can get $50 off your DeemerBox order. Get the nice, red trim, the black box. This is a great holiday gift for folks, so check that out, DeemerBox.com/DawgNation. But make sure you use the promo code DawgNation to get $50 off. Also, let me say, I told y'all yesterday, Saturday, in the stands, ticket in hand, a fan for a change, as opposed to the ivory tower that is the press box, locked away in the antiseptic conditions. No, I'll be out and amongst the people on Saturday. Can't wait for that, and can't wait for DawgNation Invasion there as well. I know a lot of you are making plans on being with us there for the tailgate. You've got your tickets. You're looking forward to your Gator Hater t-shirt. Huge thanks to everybody who's made that possible. Our friends from R.S. Andrews, Kroger, and Peach Pass. Just really, really excited about DawgNation Invasion coming up on Saturday. And really appreciate R.S. Andrews, Kroger, and Peach Pass for making all of that possible. All right, I mentioned DeAndre Swift a moment ago. What Sean Davis, the Florida defensive back, might or might not have said about him. There is, however, though, something that Swift said this week, or a couple things that Swift said, that I think are worth our attention and deserve to be talked about here, especially from a specific vantage point. I think that DeAndre Swift is very, very quickly becoming the most interesting member of the Georgia team. Maybe the best player, that's up for argument, that's up for debate, but most interesting and most poignant when he speaks. I think that Swift has moved far out in front of anybody else on that. He's not necessarily the loudest player on the team, the most boisterous. He's not necessarily a talk show host with his mannerisms and his voice inflection, but in terms of the content of his words, they're pretty powerful. Let me give you a couple of examples of that, and then I think an important takeaway for you. First of all, as a lot of Georgia players would say this week, he understands the importance of the Georgia-Florida rivalry. Let me at least start with that. Here is Swift saying what we all already believe, that this is a big one in Jacksonville on Saturday.
It's amazing. It's one of the best ones we have. The atmosphere, the half and half, the fans, the red and the blue. It's just, when you walk out there for pregame warm-up, you just look in the stands and like, wow. So it was crazy. It was crazy.
So obviously a lot going on there in Athens on Monday when he's speaking, but you get the gist of that, talking about just how crazy the atmosphere is. And for those of us, and I know that's kind of a touchy subject about the future of Georgia, Florida, and Jacksonville, but the one thing that those of us who attend the game would say is there is something special about the cocktail party, the events leading up to that, the game itself, and it's cool to hear DeAndre Swift kind of echoing the same thing. However, something else that Swift says, and there's a specific reason why I play this for you, something else that Swift says is, as cool as that atmosphere is, it certainly sounds like the idea of one day playing this thing in Athens and in Gainesville, home and home, despite the fact that the contract's going to keep this game in Jacksonville for a few more years, it certainly sounds like that's something that DeAndre Swift is also very open to, and not just open to it, he's eager to see it happen. Here's Swift again.
I think it's good. I would like to play them here, like to go over there sometimes. So I think in Jacksonville, it's always good, especially half and half. But I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes out when playing for Georgia and playing at Florida.
Now, there's a specific reason why I play that. Let me explain why. DeAndre Swift has proven over the last couple of weeks that he is not necessarily a guy that toes the company line. He says what he means, he says what he feels, and he doesn't worry too much about the consequences. Georgia would prefer its players stick to the same script of one game at a time and everything is great and everything is awesome and blah, 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 say a lot without saying anything. That's what Georgia would prefer its guys do, but Swift is his own guy who kind of speaks his own mind. So even though the company line for Georgia right now is, hey, the future of Georgia, Florida, and Jacksonville is the way we want to go, Swift says, that's not necessarily what I would prefer, and he's free and open and comfortable enough to step up and speak that. The reason why that matters is when a guy has shown the willingness to speak openly about a subject, you can then trust what he says. You can assume that he's being honest, that he's not just telling you what you want to hear. So keep that in mind when the subject of the Georgia offense also comes up. Swift has not necessarily been that happy with that based on some of the things he said in the past. He has said he wants to get the ball to playmakers in space more. It also sounds like, based on the work being done in the off week, that he thinks the Georgia offense is taking some steps to get into that direction. Once again, this is kind of a crowded room. Swift's not the loudest speaker. You have to listen closely to hear this. But given the fact that Swift has proven himself to be honest, proven himself to be a person that speaks his mind, listen to his current assessment of the Georgia offense going into the Florida game on Saturday. You will like this.
We worked on a lot of things, third down situation, being more explosive, winning one-on-one matchups, creating for everybody, running backs, on linebackers. Our receivers did a good job of getting open on DBs.
So I heard three buzzwords there, or at least buzz phrases. He said, we're working on getting explosive and doing a great job of it. We're working on creating one-on-one matchups and doing a great job of it. Even mentioning the receivers, the best that I could tell, even mentioning the receivers saying they're doing a good job of winning their battles right now too. Now, it's one thing for someone who's going to toe the company line to say that. It's one thing for someone who's, going to just sort of say whatever needs to be said and kind of, as I said before, just kind of toe in that company line to say that. But Swift has proven to be his own man. Swift has proven to be someone who has his own opinions. And he just gave you three things there. Happy with how much more explosive we seem to have gotten over the bye week. Happy with our one-on-one matchups. Happy with how the receivers are playing. This is DeAndre Swift, who has not always been happy, saying, you know what? I actually feel pretty good about this offense going into the Florida game on Saturday. You can choose to trust him or not, but based on his recent track record of truth-telling, I think DeAndre Swift's someone I'd believe if he's saying that, and we'll see how that all plays out against the Gators on Saturday. It's great to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Deemerbox. Fun show. More from Kirby Smart coming up later on, but on Tuesdays, I know you like that recruiting information. Let's get that from Jeff Sintel right now as part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Deemerbox.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Looking forward to being with Jeff Sintel on Saturday as a part of our DawgNation invasion of Jacksonville. Big coverage all weekend long, including the game itself, and of course after the game there as well. But recruiting stuff to take care of before we get there. It is time for our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with Jeff Sintel. And Jeff, I'll say good morning to you. Let me start with something that you wrote about at DawgNation.com yesterday, and certainly Dawg fans are very interested in the current status of 5-star defensive lineman Jordan Burch. Burch has been taking some visits, doesn't talk a lot. We thought he might be down to 3. He says he's down to 5. George is at least one of those. What's the best you can decipher on this, Jeff? What is the latest with Jordan Burch, a guy that I think Georgia really needs, after Burch has included UGA in his top 5?
For you, I think what he said there, and normally people yawn when they get top 5s, but folks, this is different with Jordan Burch. Jordan Burch doesn't do any media. His high school program limits access to his practices. They want him to lead a very sheltered prospect life, and for him to come out with a top 5 is definitely, at least we could say, some of the most revealing things that have been said so far in his recruitment. LSU gets in there, Brandon. That's where he took his official visit to this past weekend. Alabama is also in there. I would expect him to be, along with every other recruit in the Northern Hemisphere, I would say, or the Western Hemisphere, to be at the Alabama-LSU game on November the 9th. And, that's kind of where Jordan Burch is right now. He has got his top 5 schools. Georgia, no surprise there that he was clearly in there, but Brandon, he's a different type of talent, man. He's about 6'5", 255. Most of the viral highlights on social media have him playing a Wildcat quarterback, have him playing wide receiver, playing running back, along with kind of shredding some South Carolina Independent School League defensive lines as a defensive end. Kind of a different type player, and that's why he's rated as the nation's number 2 overall prospect for this cycle.
So you obviously have the obligation to report the news. I'm lucky. I get to spout off my opinions, and I'll do that now. I think the fact that he has been so quiet with his recruitment, in addition to the fact that may just be part of his personality, but the level of quietness that he's shown, to me, indicates that he's not going to South Carolina, because a young man playing high school football in Columbia, if he was going to the Gamecocks, that's all you'd ever hear about. So this is my opinion, not the facts, not the news reporting. It certainly seems to me that South Carolina may be one of the trailers here when it comes to this top 5 overall. However, we've also kind of talked about this kind of a Georgia-Clemson battle. When I see the presence of an Alabama, when I see the presence of an LSU in this top 5, especially given LSU's recent recruiting momentum, knowing the fact that Burch was there this past weekend, all of a sudden I take Baton Rouge maybe a little bit more seriously, even though that's not really a school we've connected to this player all that much. I mean, what do you think of these sort of new names in this race? Is LSU for real on this? They certainly pulled a shocker last week with Gilbert and followed that up with B.J. Ojulari, who we'll talk about more in a moment. But is LSU, is Alabama, are they real contenders here? Is this a real top 5, in other words?
Well, Brendan, I would imagine every player's got to get to a top 5 so he can take his official visits. Obviously, Burch showed something right there when he took an official visit to LSU, and then abruptly, just right after the fact, the Tigers in its top 5. And, man, we got to really just got to recognize that LSU is the darling right now of a lot of players across the Southeast. They're a hot program. They got that jazz hands type offense. They've always been known for playing good defense, and that's a great environment to play in front of those rowdy fans. So, lots of. I guess the other point I want to make sure all the folks kind of lean in on here about Jordan Burch is he doesn't do a lot of media. He does virtually no media. So how can he communicate what he's doing or where his recruiting goes? Well, the time and tested way for this is always to happen is one of our maxims here on the DawgNation Daily platform, and that's follow the visits. I think we spoke about this in the forum where Clemson had to drag him tooth and nail, or had to do a lot of pulling at least, to get him to come for one of their all-in events over the summer. That's the one trip he's taken to Clemson, and now let's count the trips to Georgia so far. He was there for a junior day in I believe, January. He was there for Georgia's G-Day. He was there for Georgia's cookout. He was there for an official visit, not an unofficial visit, for the South Carolina game. When I count them all up, Junior Day, G-Day, cookout, scavenger hunt, don't forget the scavenger hunt, and then the unofficial visit for the South Carolina game. And he still has a visit left in his back pocket to take to the Bulldogs if he wants to. that would be his official visit. I would think he's saying something about Georgia's chances by the frequency and the way he visits Athens compared to some other schools on his list.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good thing to bring up. It's our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with Jeff Sintel. And I want to talk about Darnell Washington for a minute because, it's kind of funny, Jeff. Obviously, there's media everywhere now, and the country seems to get smaller because of how it's connected by social media. But there are still certain aspects of recruiting that kind of play out like the telephone game. What happens in Nevada by the time it makes its way to Georgia? Has it been lost in translation somewhat? There was some social media chatter over the weekend about Washington being ejected from a game, maybe involved in an altercation. Hard to tell what really went on there in terms of are aspects of that exaggerated, but certainly was the kind of thing that at least in some form or fashion made its way back here to Georgia. I saw Georgia fans talking about this on Twitter over the weekend. Anything you can add to what's going on with Darnell Washington right now?
Yeah, Brandon, I'm just going to be kind of clear and forthright with this. That's something that folks should pay attention to, or at least monitor with Darnell Washington, especially considering what may or may not have all went down with Zachary Evans earlier this year. There's not just tweets about it, Brandon. There are published reports that range, even quotes by the Desert Pines head coach to say that Darnell Washington was involved in something, may have escalated as far as to shoving at the end of the game, and he was ejected. And that's something to take a look at, even if you're the nation's number 11 prospect in the country. Darnell Washington, don't know yet if he'll receive any sanctions from his school for that, but he also picked up his Under Armour All-American jersey on Monday at a ceremony from his school. So Darnell Washington, 6'7.5", 269 pounds. Looks like a gigantic tight end prospect with a lot of range, with a lot of wiggle and a way to be almost virtually uncoverable over the middle of the field. Those are a lot of hot points there to get the mouth of Georgia football fans frothing a little bit. There's a situation there where his behavior was not exemplary, and that's something that we'll have to monitor and take into account.
So are we clear here about who the altercation was with? Was this with other players? There's some rumors that a coach may have been involved. Do we know the full facts of this as it stands right now?
Well, the videotape is being parceled by, I guess, the Nevada High School Association as well as the school district, Brandon. You've seen the reports out there, differences in published reports versus tweets, and I'm going to make sure I'm going to on the air on published reports from a working journalist on a lot of this. But you saw where it was the punches thrown. That was kind of muted a lot what we've seen so far. But shoving, and it may have involved other members of the team. I think it traces back, Brandon, to some of the best information on this. I think he had hurt his wrist also in that game. And he continued to kind of perform and was called on to block in that game, and there was some level of disagreement there that added to this story.
Okay, yeah, so we'll follow that and kind of see where it goes. I'm sure you'll have more on that at DawgNation.com or at forum.DawgNation.com. A lot going on there with Darnell Washington, it sounds like. We got an interesting piece of news when B.J. Ojulari flipped from Tennessee to LSU. Ojulari is obviously the brother of Azeez Ojulari, and it seems like Georgia has kind of, I don't know if it's fair to say, chosen not to be involved in Ojulari's recruitment, but we certainly haven't connected that school to this name very much. And to see him do this so quickly after Rick Gilbert also chose LSU, Jeff, it kind of leaves me with a lot of questions. I'm not quite sure how to streamline this to you for just one answer, but should Georgia have been involved more with B.J. Ojulari than it was? And if it had been, given the fact that he's a Marietta teammate of Gilbert, would it given Georgia a better shot at Gilbert? What do you make of all of that?
Brendan, I'm not going to go down too far the road with this one. I don't think this story is really much of a starter at all. I think Georgia can clearly look at, they only needed one inside linebacker. They didn't need any inside linebackers for this class, Brandon. Noah Sewell's just somebody special. They didn't really need an outside linebacker for this class. Mikhail Sherman is just somebody very special. They were all in on Mikhail Sherman for a long time. That recruitment was great and prospered, and he committed to Georgia way back in April, Brandon. So at that point, the key target, when they knew in a thrifty year, Brandon, mind you, they only have 23 available scholarship slots from the jump for the 2020 class. And needing another outside linebacker, when they look at Jermaine Johnson and we look at Adam Anderson, And when they had Brenton Cox on campus for a lot of the fertile months of B.J. Ojolari's recruitment, and then they had Mikhail Sherman. You mentioned Nolan Smith. Georgia just simply did not need a player of his type for at least another cycle, and they looked elsewhere. And I think the frequency and the way Georgia was recruiting him compared to other schools was very telling. And I think that's why Georgia was never really a major factor for B.J. Ojolari, especially after signing day for the 2019 class came and delivered another bounty of outside linebacker prospects for Georgia. I mean, folks are going to sit there and rail about B.J. Ojolari. They got to remember, some people have every right to worry about how much Adam Anderson is not playing right now and how you get Nolan Smith and Jermaine Johnson on the field at the same time with the evolution of Azeez Ojolari into one of the top 5 or top 6 players on the entire football team at this time. All those guys have multiple years of eligibility left, and it was an example where BJ just kind of looked straight in the face and said, there's not a way I'm likely going to play at Georgia for 1 or 2 years. And, that's something I don't think it had much of anything to do with Eric Gilbert. Eric Gilbert wasn't going to go to Georgia. Wasn't going to field Georgia, even if his buddy B.J. Ojolari was going to go there as well. You got to remember, B.J. Ojolari had been committed to Tennessee for a long time, as well as his starting quarterback in high school. Harrison Bailey had been committed to the Vols for a long time. Gilbert simply was an isolated recruitment that was going to find the best fit, the best feeling, and the best offense for him to employ his talents in.
So to be clear, I'm not saying for sure that Georgia should have recruited B.J. Ojolari more because, honestly, I don't know. I'll leave that to the scouts to decide one way or another. But there are going to be some players in this 2020 class who are kind of that best player available type thing, and I reckon it's interesting to think that Ojolari, given the fact that his brother Azeez has been as good at Georgia as he is, and given the fact that Ojolari has been such a hot name among so many SEC programs, Tennessee and LSU included, it's just kind of interesting. I don't have any kind of vantage point to say that Georgia was wrong for the way that it recruited Ojolari or maybe wrong for prioritizing some players over him, but it's at least interesting, given the fact that he's drawn so much interest from other SEC teams and given the fact that Azeez has been as good as he has been.
Yeah, I think the first thing about the Ojolari family and the way these boys get down is, man, they are really great football players, great characters, great young men. They will be great ambassadors of any program they go to. There's also a difference between Azeez Ojolari and DJ Ojolari. Azeez is more of that guy that can play either defensive end spot on the edge. He can hold up as a run defender and as a pass rusher. He was about 6'3" and some change at about 230 pounds coming out of high school. B.J. Ojolari is a little bit different. Now, he is a phenomenal football player. I've seen him dominate high school All-Americans as an offensive tackle and as an outside linebacker. I've seen him hold up in a gritty game playing every snap, but he's not the same body type. He's more of a weak side defensive end, that kind of jack linebacker in the multiple front that Georgia likes to, in the odd front that Georgia likes to put out there. I think Azeez is about, going to be about 6'3", 255 pounds at his, peak in college, and I think BJ is probably only going to be about, 6'3" and about 235 pounds or so. Just different body types, different players in the plug-and-play schemes that Georgia would want to play.
It's our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with Jeff Sintel, and don't forget, Marlowe's Matchup returns this Thursday. Myself, John Stinchcomb, looking ahead to the Florida Gators on Saturday. We'll look forward to doing that with all of you. Going to be a great time for that. And, of course, Marlowe's also a great time this time of year. Patio season, that means sitting outside, good-looking people in the crowd, great chef-inspired food, craft cocktails. Around here, we have been big fans of Marlowe's Tavern for a long time, and so many of you who've taken our advice and checked it out for yourself, you've got great things to say about it there as well. Each and every menu in each of the various taverns around, including the one close to you in your neighborhood, they have kind of their own twist on the menu, their own special creations to kind of really bring out the personality of the chef who's in that particular location. So check out the Marlowe's Tavern close to you, the one right there in your neighborhood, and you'll be, I believe, as big a fan of it as Jeff and I both are. So, Jeff, on Saturday, I was really enjoying myself at home, waking up on a Saturday morning, getting ready for college game day to start. I'm watching SportsCenter before that. They're rolling through the top 10 plays from the night before, the old staple of the program, and lo and behold, when you get to play number one, it's Marshawn Lloyd coming out of the Beltway area with one of these leaping moves as a running back. He was number one play on the list on ESPN on Saturday, obviously a South Carolina commit, and there's a part of me that wonders, Georgia's still looking for that second running back, I would presume, for its 2020 class. Lloyd's committed to South Carolina. They are absolutely a tire fire at the moment. The demise of the Gamecocks, even though they did beat Georgia head-to-head, does that give Georgia a chance to get back in on Marshawn Lloyd in any form or fashion, or has that ship sailed at this moment? Because certainly Lloyd seems to be putting together a pretty impressive collection of highlights thus far.
Brandon, did you spit out your second cup of coffee? Did it make that bacon, egg, and cheese taste a little sour, a little too spicy on a Saturday morning, man?
I have to admit, it was not – I mean, although I loved the highlight, like watching Lloyd play, it was a reminder of a miss that I would have preferred not to have that early on a Saturday morning.
Brandon, you're going to make me sound like an old man here, but sometimes the way you act, the way you live and breathe, sir, is a reflection of the fan base you hang out with every single day, man, because you concentrate on what you don't have in Marshawn Lloyd, and yet you don't notice, just because Kendall Milton wasn't on SportsCenter, that he has 14 carries for 230 yards, and I think 4 touchdowns last week, on the same Friday night. And listen, Lloyd is a guy, I do like your unique phrasing of the term tire fire. It sounds like you've whipped that one around the golf course or around the fairway a time or two, or pulled it out of the bag. But Marshawn Lloyd, when you start thinking about the back and the ideal back that Georgia could close with in 2020, I don't think that name is quite as high as others are right now. And part of that's because Marshawn Lloyd seems to be very set, very happy about being a future Gamecock. And sometimes these young men, they don't look at the tire fires. They don't look at maybe what the program is not doing. They see a way for them to come in and be a catalyst and a change agent for maybe Marshawn Lloyd to take that South Carolina finger-licking good chicken right now to a lot of SEC defenses and rise up out of the coffin like an Undertaker, man, and just restore some run game to that program.
I want to ask you about Noah Sewell before we're done here as part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. But since you bring up Kendall Milton, here's the one thing I'll say about Milton. There's been a lot from that family over the last few days about kind of losing that fifth-star status, even though we all believe that Milton is still every bit as good a running back as he ever was. There's a little saltiness about no longer being a composite five-star. I love the idea, Jeff, of a guy of Milton's caliber, of his talent profile, being at Georgia with something to prove. I think that's really a really fun combination. An angry Milton, an ornery Milton, someone that's got a little spice to him because of maybe the fact that he's been told he's too slow, and therefore he tries even harder to kind of run people over and put them in the dirt. That is a deal I will sign up for 9 days a week right there. I love the idea of an angry Kendall Milton.
Angry Kendall Milton. That's kind of like one of the variants of the Hulk, I guess, right now. But Brennan, I think he's fallen. He's lost his fifth star. He's down to a 4-star. I think Gurley was the nation's number 7 or 8 running back coming out of high school. So he's never going to fall that far in this class. But I think there's a lot of ways in which Kendall Milton, and this is his senior season where he's basically been training for his first spring practice as an SEC football back for maybe the last 6 to 8 months. And I think this little situation right here has been some giddy up or some impetus for him to really tunnel vision and lock in and find even some more of his best football, or find another level to his game. Because a lot of these young athletes, when they've been told they're great all this time, and then someone runs something counter to that across a lot of headlines, that's just the thing they need to get even more motivated for their final Friday nights of their high school career.
All right, last question. You can make it quick if you want to, but I am curious about this. Actually, maybe don't make it quick. Give us everything you got on it. Noah Sewell does go to Eugene, Oregon for an official visit. Obviously, a significant one given the fact that his brother is a star player for the Ducks offensive line. Oregon's certainly rolling right now, doing well on the field. Should UGA fans be worried about the Oregon visit for Sewell?
Well, I mean, Brandon, it's funny because he really didn't know which one he was going to take. He just knew he was going to take an official visit. He chose the Washington State visit there. Brendan, to me, it's always been Oregon and Georgia. Oregon was kind of the leader and the team that was going to be hard to knock off the block until around June, when he really immersed himself in the Georgia program. Here's what I'm watching down the stretch. Remember, Noah Sewell has told us that he might make his decision toward the end of his senior season. He's in the playoffs right now, the Utah high school football playoffs. He's never taken that official visit to Texas A&M. That one got scrubbed when it was supposed to be earlier this month for the Alabama game. So if he reschedules that, or if he doesn't reschedule that, Tennessee was always a school that was in the mix there as well. He's really just down to Oregon and Georgia so far with official visits. He doesn't take any more in the next couple of weeks. It's pretty clear tell that it's still going to be between those two programs, and I think that's what it is. It's a choice between Oregon and kind of following his brother's path and being kind of a known guy around that campus and knowing what he's going to get there, or it's a chance to go play in the SEC for Georgia with a defensive-minded program with a linebackers coach that's put guys in the NFL, that's had a Butkus Award winner, and challenge his game against the very best players in the SEC, the very best players in the country. I think that's what it's going to come down to, being his own man or maybe following the familiar with choosing to be an Oregon Duck.
Well, let me try to take one more pass at this, and then we'll let you go. When Keely Ringo visited Oregon on this show and Before the Hedges, we, for the most part, treated that as that's a visit high, because there's a lot of social media chatter after that visit, and I, for the most part, said that's going to wear off, that's going to wear down, because every official visit goes well, and every young man has a way of saying thank you for the treatment. The hospitality kind of always shows off a lot of pictures and just a lot of happy talk coming off an official visit. That's pretty well the way it always goes. However, when it's the same kind of stuff with Sewell, given the fact that his family's got a connection to the University of Oregon, I have a tendency to think that might be a little bit more. I don't have any reason to believe that Sewell's going to choose Oregon necessarily, but I certainly take whatever visit high stuff you see on social media, I take that more seriously for Sewell because of the deeper connection he has to Oregon. It's more than just a cool uniform to him. Would you agree with me that some of the stuff we hear about Sewell and Oregon certainly seems to be more substantive, just given the fact that his brother also plays there?
Yeah, Brandon, that's something. But I think with Oregon, this is a school that was always going to be A1A or in the pole position a lot there with Georgia. I mean, with Oregon and Georgia trying to come and kind of flip that guy off that or move him off his block a little bit or move him out of his gap. I think, Keely Ringo didn't have those, maybe those ties. But the other thing you got to think about there with Ringo is, Ringo was Oregon wasn't really considered as one of his A1A schools like Georgia and Texas have always been. And then you keep looking, and I was waiting for you to say something like, Jeff, where's all the social media love yet from Noah Sewell? Because he hadn't put out a lot of pictures yet from his Oregon visit or anything like that. You got to remember, though, Brendan, his visit extended into Sunday night.
Yeah.
He's had a lot of instances where his officials, go into Monday, or they go into Monday when he's traveling back. And everybody that thinks about location issue here, well, Oregon is still a long way away from Orem, Utah, Salt Lake City area. It's not quite as far away from Athens, but that's going to be quite a commute to get there all the time as well. And I just don't think location and familiarity is going to be a big deal, because the Sewell family, they got lots of their sons in college football. They've seen a lot of the Pacific Northwest. They've seen a lot of Nevada, Utah, a lot of that area. I think this is simply going to come down to where he feels the most comfortable and where he feels he will drop in, plug and play, and succeed and chase down his dreams. I think some of the uniqueness that Oregon may have in their recruiting pitch, and we'll learn more when we kind of get a little bit more details of what exactly was presented to him on his official visit. But they see him as a guy that will do a lot of things. He could be a rush-the-passer guy, an inside linebacker guy, a guy that can line up in certain situations on a tight end, maybe even get some carries on the goal line at some point. I think the variety of way Oregon could use him might be a very interesting way for them to try to stand out in his recruitment, aside from being in the SEC and aside from playing from a coach and a coaching staff that have such a strong defensive background. I think, Brennan, you can start chewing your nails like watching Marshawn Lloyd on Saturday morning. You see a lot of paintball or really cool pictures that Oregon was able to put together for a sense of brotherhood there with his potential future teammates in Oregon. Because I think brotherhood, kinship, feeling like he belongs among the team and is very welcomed among the team. I think that's another thing that will go a long way in Noah Sewell's recruit.
All right, Jeff Sintel, thanks for being a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. More good stuff coming tomorrow on Before the Hedges. We'll look forward to seeing you on location at the Kroger on Ponce for that. Great new location there, and we appreciate you being with us here today as well.
Brandon, are you going to go dressed up as a Gator hater tomorrow?
Listen, I don't know that I'm going to be able to pull off a costume this year. Yeah, a Gator hater may be a pretty good costume for me to pull off. That's kind of the mode we're in here this week. How about you? You going to go costume?
I might, man. You know I like to dabble and have some fun, sir.
Well,
but I know you would be in a Gator hater costume no matter what.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Not that I don't like to have fun. I just don't know quite that the costume's gonna come together here this year for me on that. But I'll be looking forward to seeing you nonetheless, and looking forward to doing that. And, of course, great to have you as part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update there as well.
All right, guys. Everybody have themselves a good Tuesday.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Boy, really good stuff from Jeff Sintel, laying it out there on the visit for Sewell to Oregon. I take that trip seriously. Interesting stuff on Jordan Birch. Trying to correct the record a little bit about what might or might not have happened with Darnell Washington. Certainly carefully worded language from Jeff on that. So pay attention to that and see where that goes. Forum.DawgNation.com, great place for all of that. DawgNation.com as well for all the latest UGA recruiting news. With that said, let's kind of roll through here. Let's get ready to do our SEC through here for a moment. By the way, let me remind you about my friends at MyBookie here, because I know a lot of you like to kind of get in, get some action down. A lot of you told me that you've actually gotten some bets down. You've been winners thus far this year. That's always a great feeling. 3 consecutive winning weeks, by the way, for the kid here. So start to follow. I don't want to hear. Connor's trying to give me his picks. I can't hear him through the glass. I don't know what he's saying. Connor's doing better than me right now. But all that matters is getting hot at the right time. 3 straight winning weeks for me. That means I'm making money. And at MyBookie, you can make money before you even get your first bet down, because when you make your first deposit, you get a big deposit bonus up to $1,000. You can get your first deposit doubled, but you got to use the promo code DawgNation, all one word, spelled the way it's supposed to be, DAWG, DawgNation. Find MyBookie online, and after that, you play, you win, you get paid with my friends at MyBookie. Find them online, use the promo code DawgNation, get a big first deposit bonus, and, of course, best of luck to you with your picks here this weekend. Let me start with this. Michael Lombardi is former NFL executive. He's a guy that's been an NFL executive for like 5 minutes and like a media person talking about that for like the last 20 years. He's worked for virtually every website there is. He's been on every podcast there is. And he was on a podcast this week ripping into Gus Malzahn for another failing of the Auburn offense. And it is true, I said this yesterday, that Malzahn's reputation as a great offensive mind, for the most part, that is completely done, that is completely over. We are now working on years and years and years of this not really being a great version of an Auburn offense. And you can't say it's because he's had no quarterback. He had Jarrett Stidham. And for the most part, I don't think he ever even got the best out of Jarrett Stidham, a quarterback that was, at one point in time, as hot a prospect as you could have been on the recruiting trail when he signed with Baylor before transferring over to Auburn. Malzahn couldn't even get anything out of him. So Malzahn is a great offensive mind. That's old. That's just passé. You know what was great? Cam Newton was a great college quarterback. Malzahn, working with him as an offensive coordinator, was being dragged by him. There are kind of guys who get pulled, and there are kind of guys who get pushed. Malzahn wasn't pushing Cam Newton to success. He was getting pulled by him. And beyond that, Nick Marshall, nothing. Jarrett Stidham, nothing. Bo Nix, thus far, nothing. Malzahn is not a great offensive mind anymore. But I think what needs to also be said coming off the game against LSU is you got to be careful being too harsh on Malzahn. And I say this to the fans themselves, because they are just killing him. They're killing Bo Nix. They want Joey Gatewood in place of Bo Nix the rest of the season. Here's where not being a fan helps. Here's where not being a fan of a school gives you a great overall perspective. The most significant story facing Auburn right now is not anything involving Malzahn's decisions or any kind of ineffectiveness of the young players. The biggest issue Auburn faces is the schedule that it plays. Auburn has placed Oregon out of conference. They've been on the road to 2 top 10 teams thus far this year. Through about 7 or 8 games, few teams in college football are going to have any kind of schedule to rival that. Now, I'm not telling you that Auburn will be a national championship contender otherwise, but most of the stuff you think about Auburn for the bad is heavily, heavily shaded by the schedule in which it's played. Defense, good enough to keep in every game. Offense kind of struggling. But some of that is just obscured by the fact that you give Auburn Clemson's schedule, for instance, the best win Clemson's had thus far, Texas A&M. Auburn also has that win. Give Auburn Clemson's schedule right now. For the most part, people probably feel a little bit different about Auburn. And this idea that somehow, Bo Nix is some horrible disappointment. I mean, honestly, this was not Tua Tagovailoa coming out of high school. This was not Trevor Lawrence coming out of high school. Good freshman quarterbacks. I'm not even sure this was Jake Fromm coming out of high school. This was a pretty good prospect whose last name was famous to Auburn fans, but this was not some sort of generational talent. If anything, he was overhyped by Auburn fans. Nix is playing right now about as well as most of the recruiting industry probably thought he would play. He's had some moments of good, he's had some moments of bad, but this was never a generational prospect at quarterback. So maybe some over-criticism of the Auburn offense here, at least for a moment. Let me do a couple things real quick here as well. Did you see Football Scoop had the rumor of Jeff Fisher, former Titans coach, former NFL coach, maybe ending up at Vanderbilt as replacement for Derek Mason? That doesn't make any sense for me. Maybe Fisher would want the job. Obviously, I'm sure he'd like to coach again. But if you gave me the choice of a college program, not an NFL team trying to go 8-8, but a college program or 7-9, whatever record Fisher was famous for, if you give me a college coach, would you really take Jeff Fisher over Derek Mason? I'm not quite so sure I would. If Mason's out at Vanderbilt, maybe not as a head coach, but in terms of an architect of a defense, of an impact on a program, Derek Mason will be very much in demand by a lot of programs and have a chance to become a head coach again. Jeff Fisher, I'm not quite sure what he does for you. LSU now number 1 in the AP poll. We may see a situation where going into the game against LSU in a couple of weeks for Alabama, it may be a lot like Georgia-Florida, where LSU is the higher-rated team, at least on the virtue of the AP poll. Alabama almost for certain, assuming that Tua Tagovailoa is any degree of healthy, almost for certain going to be the point spread favorite there. So kind of an interesting contrast. AP poll favors LSU. Bama's still number 1 in the coaches poll, but Vegas for the game is almost certainly going to favor Alabama. We'll see how that goes. Obviously, Tua Tagovailoa getting ready to return back to practice right now. Sounds like he's going to be getting back there this week. I don't know, man. Certainly, health was a big story for him most of the final month of last season. Are we about to do the same thing all over again for Tua Tagovailoa? I think that's a story worth watching here. A guy that had some issues injury-wise at the end of last season. Let's see how that goes here this year. And by the way, one more SEC through story to get to. Dan Mullen kind of updating the status on Kadarius Toney and Grenard and Zuniga and these guys. Certainly sounds like he's trying to get them all back to full health. And one way or another, the injuries on Georgia, guys getting healthy. The injuries on Florida, guys getting healthy. That's going to be a big story for the cocktail party this Saturday. We'll make that your SEC through for now. Okay, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Deemer Box, let's turn our attention back in full to Georgia against Florida on Saturday. Kirby Smart, when he spoke to reporters yesterday, provided a pretty thorough assessment of what he thinks about Florida right now. There is one thing about this Gators team now that is different than it has been for really a long time, and Smart went into that yesterday. Let's hear some of Kirby talking about Florida.
Got a lot of respect for their team. I think Dan does a great job, number one, developing quarterbacks, but he's done a really good job this year with the kid Kyle that came in as the backup. They've become really explosive. They've got as deep a group of wide receivers as I've probably seen anywhere from top to bottom. I mean, they got 6 to 7 to 8 guys playing at wide receiver that are really good players. An elite tight end, it's probably one of the best in the country. And their defense with Todd's really aggressive, seen through all the pressure and sacks they've got. Really good corners out there on the island. They're playing at a high level, and they play special teams as good as anybody we've played. You can tell the commitment's there. They've got starters scattered all across their special teams. So across the board, it'll be a great challenge.
So I want to reiterate what I said yesterday. I believe what Kirby's going to be facing Saturday is the most important game he's coached in thus far in his UGA career. And if you had to pick an opponent to play that game against, a coach to play that game against, I think for Kirby, Dan Mullen would be that guy. Kirby has just gotten the best of Mullen over the years, even in comparison to some of the Vegas expectations in a lot of instances, given the fact that Kirby's typically had better talent. That's true for me on Saturday. Kirby, just a guy who's kind of had Mullen's number. However, what makes this Florida team different, I believe, than the one they played last year and the one that Georgia has played in previous years, you do have to be a little bit more aware of their offensive talent. I don't think this is an overwhelming great offense, but I do think they're deeper at receiver than they have been. They have some guys you have to identify. You have to know where they are. So this is a little bit more well-rounded Florida team than the ones that Georgia has played as of late. A little bit different kind of storyline. Will Muschamp never had players like that. Jim McElwain never had offensive players like that. Mullen probably didn't have these guys a year ago, at least in terms of what they kind of are right now. Kyle Trask, I still think, is kind of a shaky quarterback overall, but he's got some weapons to help him, and if Kadarius Toney does indeed come back, as Mullen's suggesting he might, that becomes even more true for Saturday. So worth paying attention to as you get ready for the cocktail party. With that in mind, let's also kind of transition here, look at some success that some Georgia guys are having around the NFL right now. It's our Top Dogs of the Week. It's presented by Kroger. Few names I kind of want to shout out and celebrate here for a moment. Let me start with Matthew Stafford, the Georgia quarterback, throwing the ball all over the yard on Saturday. 3 touchdowns in a win over the Giants. Sony Michel also had 21 carries, 74 yards. Patriots beat up on the Browns. Nick Chubb, though, did have 131 yards in that game. Pretty good job by him all the way around. And how about Chris Conley? Doing a good job for the Jacksonville Jaguars right now. Fun team to watch. He has 4 catches, 103 yards. Jags beat the Jets 29-15. It's our Top Dogs in the NFL. It's brought to you by our friends at Kroger. And tomorrow, make sure you check out Moonlight Madness. Great event taking place at local Kroger stores around the Atlanta area from 4 to 7 p.m. You can enjoy trick-or-treating, cakewalks, cookie decorations, and a whole lot more. It's a fun event. Kroger does this every year to get ready for Halloween, and it's a great chance to get stocked up on your Halloween candy, last-minute decorations, whatever you need. Be a part of Moonlight Madness tomorrow from 4 to 7 at Kroger's all throughout the city of Atlanta. And by the way, as we get ready to wrap up, I'll also tell you as a part of Moonlight Madness tomorrow, a precursor to that event at the brand new Kroger on Ponce, 725 Ponce de Leon Avenue in Atlanta. We're going to be there tomorrow, myself, Jeff Sintel, for Before the Hedges. Show begins at 3 p.m. as always, so it's the same show that we do each and every week here from our DawgNation World Headquarters studios. Tomorrow, doing that live from the brand new Kroger on Ponce. Really cool location. They have a crowbar. It's kind of right there on the Beltway. This is a very, very hip location for Kroger. Really, really fun stuff. So we're going to be there having a good time. Sounds like Jeff may be in costume. I will not be in costume, but I'll be with you tomorrow starting at 3 p.m. for Moonlight Madness and Before the Hedges. That's all tomorrow. Kroger on Ponce. By the way, Gatorhater Updater, getting ready for it. How about 1,095 days? Let's watch that number keep climbing, even beyond Saturday. Thanks for being with us, DawgNation Daily, presented by DeemerBox. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We will remind you that, boy, it's cold again last night, at least a little bit cold for my family. It's cold every night. But if you're kicking on that heat for the first time this year, that's always a little bit of a nervous thing. Is it safe? Can you make it through the cold weather season to come? Well, R.S. Andrews can give you the peace of mind you need for that. That mega tune-up, that $99 tune-up to give your family the peace of mind that it needs to make its way through the cold weather year to come. So go to rsandrews.com to find out more about that and take advantage of that. All right, we'll get Connor Riley here in a moment. I know many of you were asking about Connor yesterday. He is back with us today, and we will hear from him. But I also want to hear from you on both Facebook and YouTube. I believe I started on YouTube yesterday, so let me start on Facebook today. Get a lot of your comments as we get ready for this. Raju Johnson says, and on video. That's true. Jerry Swafford says, still sweating in Savannah. Well, you know, that's one of the cool things about Savannah, a town that I absolutely love. You get that nice warm weather even late in the fall, and I guess based on the early forecast that I'm seeing, pretty good weather for Jacksonville on Saturday too. So pretty good down there on the Florida First Coast, the Golden Isles, Savannah. Boy, I love the cocktail party, man. I know there are a lot of people that want to come in here and tell you, this game doesn't need to be played anymore, blah, 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 blah. Listen, there's nothing wrong in life having a little fun. Nothing wrong in life with having a little fun. And I know Kirby wants the game in Athens, even though he kind of pushed back on that a little bit yesterday. I certainly think it's a plenty fair trade-off to say, we're going to keep this game in Jacksonville, but we're going to allow you to spend more money than any other program does on recruiting the rest of the year. I think it's a pretty fair trade-off, all things being equal. Shane Guy says about 70 degrees on Saturday. Good stuff there. Barry Davis says, where will Georgia need to improve to be Florida? That's what I loved about what DeAndre Swift said earlier in our show today. And I realized that it sounds like the kind of thing that you're supposed to say, that Georgia's gotten more explosive during the bye week and Georgia's receivers have performed well. battling press coverage from a very good Georgia secondary, and some of that kind of stuff sort of sounds like the kind of buzzy phrases. You wonder how real is this? How true is this really? And as I said before, Swift has been the kind of guy who's spoken his mind. He's been candid. He's been truthful, at least best I can tell, been quite truthful in a number of subjects. So if he's the one that's saying that, Georgia getting better in regards to that offense just in time for a really good defense on Saturday, then I think that's Georgia taking the step it needs to take to be ready for Florida. Now, obviously around here, we're fired up at the game. We want that to be true. And there's always a danger that when you want something to be true, it's not quite as true as you hoped it is. But in this case, the source matters to me. In this case, the voice that's saying these words is someone who's kind of put his money where his mouth is before. So the areas in which Georgia needs to improve are all on the offensive side of the ball. No, I shouldn't say all on the offensive side of the ball. They're primarily on the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, getting a little bit better with the havoc rate and things like that would be important too. But let's stay with the offense here for a moment. Being more explosive, winning more one-on-one battles, receivers doing a better job of creating the separation necessary for Fromm to deliver the ball down the field and keep the offense on schedule and keep it moving. DeAndre Swift seemed to say yesterday that he's pleased with what he's seen during the bye week, and I take that as good news. Let's get some more Facebook comments. Adrian Carver mentioning the idea of the lack of official visits to the neutral site game. And I know that came up with the idea that Georgia might petition the SEC to change that rule. I agree with Kirby on that. Most of the SEC programs are in it for their own best interest, as they should be. That's their idea. They think they have a vested interest, or maybe even a bigger word than I should use, a fiduciary responsibility to defend their own interests. They're not looking to help Georgia, Florida. I kind of agree with Kirby on that. I also don't think the idea of hosting recruits in Jacksonville is all that valuable anyway, because it's a neutral site game. Georgia sells itself when you have those opportunities on campus. So ultimately, I think the whole recruiting part of this in Jacksonville, if you could do it, I think that would be overblown anyway. I do. Brian Carter says, this morning Jacksonville showing 60% chance of showers, but it'll change by Saturday, hopefully. Yeah, I guess sometimes that forecast can change pretty quick. Richard Smith says, Pickens stepping in with Cager back. Yeah, I touched on that at the top of the show, Richard. I think that sometimes success for a receiver, a position like that, there are a few positions in football that I think are chemistry related. I think that chemistry can breed a contagion. And if Cager steps back in and does what he does, I think it makes things a little easier for George Pickens. Certainly makes the opportunity for him to also do some of those same things more possible. Same thing for Demetrius Robertson, same things for Dominic Blaylock, the guys that we've all said we want to see get the ball more. That group of pass catchers being the primary targets for Jake Fromm. A return for Lawrence Cager, I think, just raises the fortunes of all those guys. I don't necessarily believe in momentum as a concept necessarily, but I am a little bit more comfortable saying certain things just seem to be contagious. When one guy makes an error in baseball, it seems like you have two or three that quickly follow. When one guy gets a hit, sometimes two or three can quickly follow. A couple big plays from Lawrence Cager on Saturday. Wouldn't be surprised if a couple more big passing plays quickly follow. That's just kind of the way that things go, especially if Georgia does decide, maybe, to kind of put that foot on the gas just a little bit. You never know how much a healthy Lawrence Cager might also impact the other receivers as well. This goes beyond just Cager for me. It's what Cager could potentially mean for the other receivers. Kirby's already called him a great leader. How about leading by example on the field to help a group that could use a little bit of that right now?
Right. To your point, even if you put him out on the field and he's not 100%, that probably pulls C.J. Henderson, Florida's best cornerback, off George Pickens. Now, Florida obviously has other good cornerbacks, Marco Wilson. But I think that makes things easier for Pickens and just an easier life in general. And, I mean, right now you'd probably have to say, if you were going to put money down on this, George Pickens would probably be Georgia's leading receiver on Saturday, correct?
Assuming he's healthy, that's what I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, assuming he's healthy, that's what I'd say. And I'm going to give you a crackpot opinion that I have no justifiable reason to
My favorites.
Provide. I think it's easier for Lawrence Cager to play hurt than it would be for a guy like, say, Demetrius Robertson.
Right.
Robertson, whose game is kind of built on speed. Not that Robertson won't go over the middle. He's shown you that he will. But it's a game built on speed. Cager really is about chemistry with Fromm and about how he uses his body. You don't have to run past people to do that. In fact, it's not even really necessary at all. So if you told me, hey, a Georgia receiver is going to try to give it a go, maybe less than 100%. A guy like Pickens or Cager are just more capable of doing that because they're using body position and size. Or with Cager, it's just a certain level of craftiness. He's just kind of a crafty player.
A veteran.
A veteran, yeah. He just plays the game like a veteran. I think for guys like that, it's just easier to play the game when you're a little banged up as opposed to a guy that's primarily using speed.
And you look at a guy like Demetrius Robertson, he's had lower body injury issues, which has sort of slowed him down a little bit at times this year. Whereas with Cager, I just think the big thing is going to be, making sure he doesn't take that huge hit or doesn't get just slammed to the turf and land on that shoulder that's been causing him problems. Now, they haven't been able to avoid that against Tennessee and South Carolina, which is why he left those games. But I think if Georgia's smart in the way they use Cager, which why wouldn't they be? I think they're a well-run football team. They're going to be able to, I think, assuming Cager plays, I think they're going to be able to get something out of him.
Jeremy Chapman says, do you think that Georgia, the playbook gets opened up on Saturday? Somebody else also asked, and I'm sorry I lost this name, somebody else also asked about Georgia playing not to lose. I think against Florida, the whole idea of you play to win as opposed to playing not to lose. The whole, this is a terrible cliche, but no risk it, no biscuit type of mentality. I think against Florida, you have to do that more so than most other teams because of how many negative plays the Florida defense wants to force. You have to negate their potential negative plays or their attempt to get negative plays with your own big gainers. That to me is the only recipe against Florida. I said this yesterday, Connor, when you weren't here. This is not a meal you can eat by nibbling. In other words, you got to take a few big bites somewhere along the way. Now, most fans would say that should be true against virtually every opponent that Georgia plays. Maybe that's the case. Against Florida in particular, I think you definitely have to do that a little bit more because of how disruptive the Florida defense is going to try to be, and really taking some gambles and risks in a way of trying to do that.
Right, they're going to have to, make some big plays and hit on those explosive plays. But as far as opening it up and trying to throw the ball around a whole lot, I don't think that's what we're going to see. I think this Georgia team, one, because of just who it is, and two, because I actually think this is where Georgia has a pretty decided advantage over the Gators. I think they're just going to want to try and ground and pound the Gators into submission over the course of 4 quarters, and then be selective when they take those shots downfield to try and maybe burn an over-eager Florida defense.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that overall, that this is still going to be a game where Georgia obviously sees the value in running the ball a good bit. I guess what I'm saying is when you do throw, you better make sure you really get something out of it.
This can't be like a Kentucky game where the non-George Pickens pass catchers finish with 0 receiving yards.
Yeah, that's probably.
By the way, I'd like to say something here. I've been very hard on Jeremy Pruitt in the Tennessee program. The win they had Saturday over South Carolina was very impressive and eye-opening to me. They outscored South Carolina 24-0 in the second half. That is a real football win, and kudos to Jeremy Pruitt.
Yeah, I think one of the things that happens sometimes is, and we talked about this going into the game, sometimes things can hide in plain sight. Tennessee had been playing Georgia, had been playing Alabama, and sometimes it's kind of hard to tell what you are when you're playing teams you have no chance of beating. But Tennessee was with Georgia for a half. Tennessee was with Alabama a little bit longer than that. Tennessee won at home versus Mississippi State. Quietly, they've been playing a little bit better as of late, and the South Carolina game seemed to be kind of the culmination of all that. I think it'll be interesting to see if they can maintain that the rest of the season, even with kind of a winnable schedule the rest of the way. But Tennessee for about the last month or so has been playing a lot better.
And this is the real problem with those losses to Georgia State and BYU is they've left themselves almost no margin for error during the back half of this schedule if they want to make a bowl game, because I think that bowl game, those extra practices, especially to a young Tennessee team like this, would potentially be huge. And they've got to make sure that, unlike last year when they just completely pooped the bed in their last 2 games of the season, that can't happen this year.
Justin Gunter mentioning Tennessee win helping or hurting UGA. Obviously, there's a way of looking at what happened on Saturday. Notre Dame getting beaten bad by Michigan, South Carolina getting beaten bad by Tennessee. One of Georgia's better wins, certainly its only loss, all of a sudden kind of look a little bit more suspicious. I don't really buy into all that kind of stuff too much. Georgia's biggest problem, its biggest opportunity, is the same thing. It's winning the games on its remaining schedule. And, I don't think Georgia needs resume help, and I don't really care about the fact that Georgia's loss now looks worse or best win now looks worse. I, for one, personally don't care too much about that. I think Georgia's got its dance card pretty full just trying to win the games it still has left the rest of the season.
So I did write about this, and, right now in the short term, Auburn, I think, losing again sort of hurts the potential resume because while we both, I think, agree Auburn is a good football team, I don't know how good they're going to look if they have losses to Florida, Alabama, LSU, and Georgia, theoretically.
Yeah.
But I don't think a Georgia team is getting left out of the playoff if they have wins over Notre Dame, Florida, Auburn, and either Alabama or LSU in the SEC championship game. And to make the college football playoff anyway, Georgia's going to have to win out. So I understand and certainly see, in the moment, nitpicking of Georgia's resume, but come decision day, it shouldn't be that hard to determine whether Georgia gets into the college football playoff or not.
I think that's probably true. Double R, to be self-serving just for a moment, says that the sweater I have on today is fire. I appreciate that. This is not a commercial. I bought this with my own money, so this is not a commercial or an ad. The thing I love about this is, we can't really zoom in on it, but I wanted a sweater that had the old school, when you go back and see like Irk Russell, when he was coaching the Georgia defense back in the early 80s, the Georgia gear, the symbol was the football helmet. I wanted something that had the football helmet as a symbol, so I had this specially made. So thank you very much for noticing that. I really appreciate that. I have to say, I do think I'm pretty fired today. If I had to say, I would say that I probably am. So.
By the way, speaking of fire, I mean, if you're going to tout, 3 straight winning weeks for you on our R.S. Andrews Pick'em show, you guys better be watching that show because I went 5-2 last week. 9 straight non-losing weeks. I mean, we're just giving out winners left and right at this point in time. And, if you don't want to hop on, I can't help you make money.
It is a profit center at the moment. I am very proud of that. Connor has done very well this year. I got to give him credit for that begrudgingly. Kevin Blackman says AM seems to be getting it together right now. This is another team that has kind of come out from a lot of these SEC teams, and this is why I can't stand the whole SEC bashing thing that goes on. There are a lot of teams in the SEC that have just played miserable schedules. One of those is A&M, but all of a sudden now that they've gotten out from underneath that, all of a sudden they look like a lot more competent football team. They've won back-to-back games now. Now you say, well, Ole Miss, Mississippi State are no great shakes, but for the most part, A&M did to Mississippi State what it should have done in College Station on Saturday. So I think you have a scenario now where that game for Georgia looks more difficult than it would have a couple of weeks ago. But conversely, the Missouri game for Georgia, we got the Florida game, looks way easier. I don't have any way of explaining this, but for some reason, Missouri cannot play outside of Como. They cannot play on the road. They got beaten up by Wyoming. They got beaten up by Vanderbilt. They got beaten up by Kentucky. 3, all things considered, pretty awful teams. And Missouri against road team in a road environment against all 3, not shown up at all. So suddenly, a Missouri game that once looked tough looks a little easier. An A&M game that to some once looked a little easier, all of a sudden looks a little tougher. So the November schedule, we're still trying to figure out what that is for UGA right now.
If I will, I'm going to push back a little bit on A&M. I'm not impressed at all that you beat the Atlanta Falcons of the SEC at the moment. That Mississippi State team has quit, laid down. They've pretty clearly got, I think, a lame duck coach. I don't think Mississippi State's going to fire him. I think he's more likely to leave for another job. But, the Missouri thing, I mean, that game just looks incredibly winnable right now. And this is coming from someone who said that was a potential trap game given when it falls on the schedule. But, the way that team has struggled.
Yeah.
And maybe that struggle against Kentucky, maybe even, in my opinion, maybe kind of makes that Georgia performance against Lynn Bowden even better because he went for 196 yards against Arkansas, 204 against Missouri, and Georgia kept him bottled up for pretty much almost the entire game, finished with less than 100 yards in that game. So, maybe this Georgia defense, while Kirby Smart might call it atrocious, I think it shows that they're pretty darn good.
Brady Pest Manager brings up a really good point on YouTube. What size ring do you wear? That's what Moorhead will be known for at Mississippi State. What a dummy. So right about that. He's even said he regrets saying that. For those of you not aware, that was one of the first. I said, what are you going to say to your team the first time you meet them, or something along those lines? It's like, hey, what ring size do you wear? Essentially, kind of touting the idea of this team winning an SEC championship or even more than that. He's even, for the most part, said that was not a good idea, and so you could not be more right about that comment. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but one of the things kind of that you and I just have always had a fundamental disagreement about, and I think Texas A&M is the perfect example of this. The one thing I pay great respect towards, but I don't think that you necessarily do, is the idea of the middle tier in the SEC. There is clearly a tier 1 that involves Alabama and LSU, and possibly is going to involve Georgia.
Or Florida, for being fair and balanced here.
Which I have no interest in doing. But, the winner of the Florida game would kind of be in that group along with Alabama and LSU. That's the tier 1 of the SEC. That next tier, though, which is Auburn and probably the loser of the Georgia-Florida game maybe, is kind of that sort of like that next group, and I respect that group. I think Auburn right now is a very tough team to play, despite the fact they've lost twice. A&M may be tier 3 by itself right now, but the fact that they are by themselves, I think it means something. The fact that they are clearly better than all the bad teams makes them a little bit harder to play, and that's something I pay more deference to than I think that you do.
I mean, maybe I just sort of subscribe to the Kirby Smart thinking. Every SEC team is capable, competent, and good. But my sort of threshold for good or really truly challenging teams is maybe more from a national perspective of can this team go and hang with the big boys? And I think right now it's fair to say that Texas A&M can't. But just because you can't do that doesn't mean, just because you don't live in the richest neighborhood in the town doesn't mean that you're poor.
Yeah.
This Texas A&M team can still do some things. They're probably going to finish 8-4 in the regular season, go beat up on some poor old ACC team, go 9-4, and they're probably going to be in the same spot they were going into last year that they were going into this year, where they're bringing a lot of talent. Jimbo's sort of trying to turn this program around. Kelmon's probably coming back for another year unless he is finally out of eligibility there. And it's still going to be that thing of, okay, yeah, but the schedule they play is incredibly difficult. And I think eventually when everyone's schedule is difficult in the SEC, you have to start winning some of those games for me to sort of believe that you're moving up in the class system.
So I want to do a bunch of comments on Georgia here, but before we're done, I wouldn't mind having like 2 minutes of talk on Oklahoma losing on Saturday and what we think that means. We haven't actually done a lot of that this week, so let's try to do a little bit of that before we're done, but a lot of Georgia before we get there. Jennifer Caldwell Sperlin says we should be ready for everyone and not look past them. That's probably good advice, Jennifer. Appreciate that. Daniel Holt says, what's your score prediction of the Georgia-Florida game? It's actually a really good question. I am getting more confident about the game as we get there. I will wholly admit that you should not buy much into that whatsoever. This is not an opinion I'm trying to push or sell. I'm just saying I personally feel better about it, but that's almost completely driven by emotion. However, specifically, what do I think happens? Connor made a pretty good pitch earlier for this being a running game, dominant game for Georgia, a part of that game plan. Still think you have to score to win. Could I see somewhere in the neighborhood of 31-14? Could I see a 2-touchdown win for Georgia here, kind of maintaining what was in place last year, a good level of space between these two teams, Georgia winning by 19 a year ago, winning by another couple touchdowns here this year. I think that Florida can be completely shut down in a way that if you're playing Alabama or LSU, you can't really hope to do that. This Florida offense is obviously not on par with that. I'm not saying that Georgia will completely shut it down, but Florida is capable of being shut down because, I'm still suspicious of Trask. So am I too ambitious for saying something that feels like 31-14?
No, because I'm going to go 24-13, and, okay. Maybe there's a garbage time touchdown thrown in there because Kirby, wants to run up the score on Mullen a little bit.
Don't hate that.
Could certainly see that being the case. I think the thing to remember in this game, this Georgia defense last year against Alabama, Alabama put up record numbers, blow-torching, opposing SEC defenses. That Alabama offense last year had better receivers, better playmakers, better talent than this Florida team has. And that Alabama team last year, the reason they won that game, in my estimation, was actually because they were able to consistently run the ball, even when that game got a little ugly in the second and third quarters. Florida is not a very good running team. I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball. I think Georgia's secondary, especially if Tyson Campbell comes back, they're going to be able to match up pretty well with these Florida wide receivers. And because of that, I think it's going to make things very difficult for Kyle Trask. He's going to have to make a lot of difficult throws to win this game. And while he's taken the open throws and he does deserve credit for that, I don't know if he can consistently do that. As far as Georgia, I feel like I know what I'm going to see from them offensively. DeAndre Swift, 20 carries, somewhere between 120 and 140 yards. Brian Herrien, 10 carries for 60 yards. Jake Fromm, I'll say he finishes somewhere between 150 and 200 passing yards. 2 touchdowns there. That's your ball game.
So let me ask you this then. We've made comparisons, and I'm curious. I'll let everybody weigh in on this. We've made comparisons between this Georgia defense and the 2017 Georgia defense. It's one thing to say about the 17 defense, though. Even though it's kind of the high watermark previously for Kirby at Georgia and obviously included Roquan Smith, that was not a very aggressive defense. I think they had 29 sacks for the year, I think. That was a defense that was a lot more content to keep the football in front of it and really cut down passing lanes more so than be havoc rate disruptive. For instance, the way that Georgia chose to play against Alabama last year in the SEC Championship, they didn't choose to do that to virtually anyone in the 27.
That was a completely different game plan than what we saw.
Yeah, almost completely different game plan than the 2017 season had been. So with that in mind, do you think Georgia on Saturday says, we haven't really been getting to the quarterback anyway. We feel like we can stop the run. Let's just not really give Trask much of a window to throw the football. He's kind of inexperienced. Maybe he coughs it up at some point in time. Do you think quietly Georgia plays a conservative defensive game plan and just tries to get some pause in the passing lanes more so than that kind of manly, masculine, let's do havoc rate, pass rush, stuff like that? Do you think quietly Georgia thinks a more conservative defensive game plan is the better play against Florida?
I actually don't in this game because I think Georgia likes to go that conservative route when it has a quarterback, when it's going up against a quarterback that it's pretty content to know that this guy can't beat them from the pocket. I think there's a chance that maybe Trask can, but a difference between Trask and some of those other guys is, DeCarrion Joyner, Lynn Bowden.
Yeah.
Trask is not the athlete that those guys are.
Yeah.
I don't think Trask is going to be running around sideline to sideline out there. I think this is going to be a very good and big games from Azeez Ojulari and Nolan Smith.
Mm-hmm.
I think if those guys can break down the pocket, break down the tackles, I think it's going to make life very difficult for Trask. Florida, their offensive line isn't terrible in terms of pass protection. They're about 7th or 8th in the conference in sacks allowed per game. But I think this is going to be a very, very big game. If Ojulari and Smith have big games on Saturday, Georgia is winning, and I don't even know if it's necessarily close.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great point. But in fairness, those guys can have big games without a very aggressive game plan because they have a chance to win those one-on-one battles.
That is technically correct, yeah.
I guess here's my point, and please understand this. I'm not necessarily arguing for a conservative game plan. I'm saying why I think it's at least a possibility. When Georgia's gotten beaten on pass plays this year, it's almost always come without safety help, or in some cases maybe with a misplay on the part of a safety, but the absence of a safety providing help has kind of always been a big issue there. Given the fact that I think you have to respect the Florida wide receivers, a little bit of safety help here and there is maybe not a bad thing overall, and that certainly is more about a conservative game plan than the opposite. Plus, with Tony coming back, I think that means that you want to have some bodies in the middle of the field, right? A lot of interior pressure leaves a lot of ground for Kadarius Toney to just find somewhere to be. I think the more – it's almost like one of these like really, really, like the worst NBA game you've ever seen where they're just bodies everywhere. I think the more bodies that Georgia can kind of spread around the field, the more difficult it is for some of these Florida guys to get the space they need to operate. Like I said, I'm not necessarily arguing that's what Georgia should do, but it's at least an option given what Florida doesn't do well and given what it kind of does well. So
I think this game, given both Tony and Kyle Pitts, Florida's tight end, this is a very huge game for Tay Crowder, Monty Rice, Nakobe Dean, and Quay Walker. Those guys need to play well because I think that's the area of the defense that Florida is going to try very hard to exploit, especially in the passing game.
Gerald Harmon brings up an interesting point. The idea that Georgia needs to be on guard for Emory Jones on Saturday. Do you think he hasn't been playing much for Florida, at least my understanding. Do you think Emory Jones is a weapon that Florida tries to exploit?
I think they're going to throw him out there, just given that they did it last year.
when we were watching practice during the spring, watching practice during the summer, they were always taking Wildcat reps and drills. And these are just drills. I don't make too much of that. They were just drills, or Wild Dog, I guess you'd say, for UGA.
And they still do that.
And they still do that. So it's just a drill. Doesn't really matter. We haven't seen that, I don't believe, in a game anytime this year. They haven't run a single Wild Dog play. Do you think Georgia
may have won it once, but
okay? Do you think Georgia runs a Wild Dog play on Saturday?
No.
Boy, James Cook, man, that's an interesting weapon to do that. Josh Abernathy says he'd like to get some pressure on Trask, and I certainly understand where that's coming from. Josh, I will admit the one thing I'm a little concerned about is, and maybe they've kind of backed off this as of late. There are some people in the football world who think they have, but what has concerned me about the Georgia defense a little bit is the extent to which early in the season they were trying to get pressure, and if you're going to talk about pressures, they've gotten way more of those this year than they had a year ago. But in terms of trying to get sacks, they certainly attempted to do that. It's resulted in more pressures, but it really hasn't resulted in that many more sacks. I will admit I do have a slight concern about that if I'm a fan. Josh saying he wants to see more pressure on Trask. Obviously, all things being equal, you'd love to do that. I'm a little bit concerned, if you can't tell, that Georgia has attempted to get quarterbacks in the ground this year and just kind of not really done that a lot.
Right. It's been a lot of close but no cigars there. And I'd be really interested to even go look Georgia's sacks by half, because I feel like almost all of them have come in the second half of games this season. Part of that might be just the score, and part of it too, Kirby's a defensive backs coach by nature.
Yeah.
He's a former defensive back. I think he just naturally has an inclination to trust his defensive backs are going to make plays on the ball more often than necessarily an outside linebacker or a blitzing linebacker getting home and bringing down a quarterback.
We got to go here. Robert Barnes says, give Trask different looks on passing downs, make him hold the ball longer so we can sack him. Robert, I like the idea of that. Connor, I also spent a good bit of time yesterday saying that Kirby Smart just has a history of out-coaching Dan Mullen. Now, you'll say, well, he had better talent. Even against the Vegas point spread, going back to Alabama, Smart was 4-3 against the spread as a defense against Mullen at Mississippi State. But two of the games in which Mullen covered, offense only scored 7 points in those games. So this idea that Mullen's this guy who gets more with less, kind of exceeds expectations at Mississippi State, for the most part, that was true against everybody else but Alabama. Even the 2014 team that was ranked number 1 briefly in the college football playoff top 25, they only scored 20 with Dak Prescott against Alabama that year. So Robert Barnes' point about, hey, just show Trask different looks, I do trust Kirby to do something defensively from a schematic standpoint that's going to be hard for Mullen to match, because that's just been the history of these guys in these head-to-head matchups.
Hey, yeah, it's kind of funny, Smart's always done really well against Mullen. Mullen's always done really well against Dave Aranda. Dave Aranda just owns Gus Malzahn, and Malzahn has had some success against Kirby Smart. It is kind of just interesting, the cyclical nature of all that and how it works. But I think this game, if Georgia and Kirby Smart wins this, this is a game where Florida. This is probably the most confident Florida's felt about this game since the game that I am not going to mention back in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
If Florida loses this game, I think all the questions about Mullen and stuff we had going into the season that he's done a very good job of answering and alleviating, I think those come back in a big, big way, sort of like you see with Malzahn this week.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Will says, does Georgia-Florida ever do a night game? Last night game in this series was 2002. It was a total disaster from the word go. I mean, just absolute, just S-show of just graphic proportions. And at that point in time, I think it was universally agreed upon it will never happen again.
I think it's one of those things where, they always want this game the week before Alabama LSU, and so they sort of, the SEC makes this the major marquee SEC game of the week, just sort of like next week, the clear runaway major marquee game is Alabama LSU. I think because of that, they're always going to want to keep it at 3:30.
Yeah, it's the only game, really, for the most part. I don't even think Alabama LSU gets this status of game time announced before the season begins.
The only other one that I know is Missouri-Arkansas, but that game is a Friday.
Yeah. So, it's the only game we start the season knowing when it is, what time it's going to be. And I don't even mean by tradition. I mean, they actually announced that early because CBS does have a unique relationship with Georgia-Florida in that the game itself has kind of contracted this time with CBS. It's really about the only game, as you said, other than the Black Friday type game. Mm-hmm. It's the only game sort of in a normal Saturday that has any say over what time it's played.
Right. It's sort of like Texas-Oklahoma
Yeah.
in that way, and that game is always a noon/11 a.m. local kickoff.
And I've always been kind of interesting, and I promise we're going off the air for this. Let's say that Georgia went on like a long streak of like just win 15 straight and like just absolutely buried the Florida program. I wonder if at a certain point in time do you lose CBS's cooperation on that anymore? Because like one of these teams has always been good for like the last 30 years, and that's been enough to sort of justify its placement on the calendar. But what if it became just such a runaway, or unfortunately,
like Tennessee, Alabama?
Yeah, something like that. Like, would CBS just finally be like, "We're not cooperating with you guys on this anymore. This is not a good enough TV product for us."
I think that probably comes from the SEC, and
Yeah.
the SEC would have to decide that. Last thing. Somebody in the YouTube comment section asked if Game Day is game to be there.
Yeah.
Game Day made the right call. They will not be at this game. They will be at SMU Memphis this week.
I'll stop it with the right call.
It's a ranked matchup between two AAC teams, one of which is undefeated.
I tell you this, I never want to hear another thing about, the ESPN's in the tank for the SEC.
Yeah.
If you're going to the Liberty Bowl for Game Day when you have Georgia, Florida, they were at Georgia, Florida last year, so that kind of changes that a little bit. But if you're going to SMU Liberty, or SMU, even still, if you're going to SMU Memphis, I don't want to hear a word but the ESPN being the tank for the SEC.
Probably fair.
By the way, 1 minute on this. Oklahoma loses. What does it mean for Georgia? Or what does it mean for college football?
I think it makes life more difficult for the Big 12, but other than that, I don't think it affects Georgia all that much.
I think Oregon was the big winner in all
Oregon
this.
was the big winner, but I watched a lot of that Oregon-Washington State game. I had a friend who was there at that Oregon-Washington State game. That Oregon team is not better than Georgia. I know they're number 7 in the polls. That Oregon team had to fight like hell to beat a decent at best Washington State team. Oregon, and I'm as big a Pac-12 homer as you'll find. This Oregon team has major questions and concerns about it. If they do backdoor their way into the playoff, whichever SEC team they have to go play in Atlanta will just, I think, beat the brakes off of them.
K-Sart, Nitch Suj, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, said don't want Game Day there. Want SEC Nation all the way.
Which will be there.
And which is going to be there. Miriam Martin Corbin also saying that there as well. I think that's a lot of fun. Alan McGovern kind of agrees, doesn't want Corso choosing the game. Drew Odom also a fan of SEC Nation as well. Honestly, I didn't know SEC Nation was this popular. I mean, I'm not even being funny. I did not know that. So that's good. Marcus Bass checking out. Appreciate you being here. All of you, thanks for being here there as well. Make sure you check out AJC.com to get your Atlanta news now. A great way to stay up to date on everything that's happening in your city, your world. Interesting stuff continues to play out when it comes to the Atlanta Falcons. Obviously kind of a weird deal for them as they have a bye week with a lot of mystery surrounding their future. The Popeye's chicken sandwich is returning. They got a story on that up at AJC.com. Also, plenty of stuff to get you ready for Halloween around the Atlanta area, too. You can check out all of that. Atlanta News Now at AJC.com. Also, huge thanks to the R.S. Andrews for being a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. And as Connor said, make sure you're watching R.S. Andrews Go with the Flow every Friday. Our buddy Dari Payro from R.S. Andrews, he's a part of that. He's been hot with his picks. Connor's been hot with his. I'm starting to come around with my own. So we're making some money right now in the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Or I should say the R.S. Andrews Go with the Flow. Hope you'll check that out. Can't wait to see you in the stands on Saturday for Georgia, Florida. And, of course, back here tomorrow at 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily, presented by DeemerBox.